Hello, my amazing children. This is Grandma Carla back with more of Pippi Longstocking. We are on chapter 10. Pippi comes to the rescue. One Sunday afternoon, Pippi was wondering what to do. Tommy and Annika had been invited out to tea with their mother and father, so she couldn't expect a visit from them. The day had been filled with pleasant activities. She woke up early and served Mr. Nielsen juice and rolls in bed. He looked so sweet as he sat there in his light blue nightshirt, holding the glass with both hands. Then she fed and groomed the horse, telling him a long story about her travels at sea. After that, she went into the living room and painted a big picture on the wallpaper. The painting showed a fat woman in a red dress and a black hat. In one hand, she was holding a yellow flower, and in the other, a dead mouse. Pippi thought it was a very beautiful painting. It spruced up the whole room. Then she sat down in front of the cabinet and looked at her bird eggs and seashells. They reminded her of all of the wonderful places where she and her papa had collected them, and the nice little shops around the world where they had bought all of the fine things that were now in the drawers of her cabinet. After that, she tried to teach Mr. Nielsen to dance the polka, but he did not want to learn. For a moment, she considered trying to teach the horse, but instead, she crawled inside the firewood box and closed the lid. She pretended that she was a sardine in a sardine can, and it was so annoying that Tommy and Annika weren't there so that they could be sardines too. But now it was starting to get dark. She pressed her little potato nose against the window pane and looked out at the autumn night. Then she happened to think about the fact that she hadn't been out for a ride on her horse for a couple of days, and so that's what she decided to do. It would be a pleasant way to end a most agreeable Sunday. She put on her big hat and went to find Mr. Nielsen, who was sitting in a corner playing with some marbles. Then she saddled the horse and lifted him down from the porch, and they rode off, with Mr. Nielsen sitting on Pippi and Pippi sitting on the horse. It was quite cold, with ice on the roads, and the horse made a great clattering noise as they raced along. Mr. Nielsen sat on Pippi's shoulder and tried to catch hold of a few tree branches as they rode past. But Pippi was riding so fast that he couldn't do it. Instead, tree branches kept slapping against his ears as he rushed by, and he had difficulty keeping his straw hat on his head. Pippi rode through the little town, and everyone anxiously squeezed up against the walls of the buildings as she stormed past. Of course, the town had a marketplace, and on the market square stood a little town hall, which was painted yellow, and several beautiful old single-story buildings. A big monstrosity of a building stood there, too. It was a newly built 4-story structure that was called the skyscraper because it was taller than all of the other buildings in town. On this particular Sunday afternoon, the little town seemed very quiet and peaceful. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a loud shouting. The skyscraper is burning! Fire! Fire! People came running from all directions, their eyes wide. The fire engine drove through the streets with its siren going, and the children of the town, who usually thought it was so much fun to see the fire engine, were now crying in terror because they thought their own houses were going to catch fire too. In the market square, a big crowd had gathered outside the skyscraper, and the police were trying to keep everybody back so that the fire engine could get through. Big flames were shooting out of the skyscraper's windows, and smoke and sparks enveloped the firemen who bravely began to put out the fire. The fire had started on the ground floor, but spread quickly to the upper floors. Suddenly, the people who were gathered in the square caught sight of something that made them all gasp with horror. At the top of the building was an attic room. A small child's hand had just opened the attic window, and there stood 2 little boys shouting for help. "We can't get out because someone has made a fire on the stairs," shouted the bigger of the 2. He was 5 years old, and his brother was a year younger. Their mother had gone out, and there they now stood all alone. Many people in the square started to cry. The fire chief looked worried. The fire engine did have a ladder, but it wouldn't reach nearly high enough. And it was impossible to go inside the building to get the boys. Despair descended on the people in the square when they realized that nothing could be done to rescue the children. And the poor boy stood up there crying. It wouldn't take long before the fire reached the attic. In the middle of the crowd gathered in the square sat Pippi on her horse. She looked with interest at the fire engine, thinking that maybe she would buy one for herself. She liked it because it was red and because it made such a racket as it drove through the streets. Then she looked at the crackling fire, and she thought it was fun to see sparks falling all around her. Eventually, she noticed the little boys up in the attic. To her surprise, they did not seem to think that the fire was particularly fun. She couldn't understand why. Finally, she had to ask the people standing around her, "Why are those children screaming?" At first, she got only sobs in reply, but at last a portly gentleman told her, "Well, why do you think? Wouldn't you be screaming if you were up there and couldn't get down?" "I never scream," said Pippi. "But if they really want to come down, why isn't anyone helping them down?" "Because it's impossible, that's why," said the portly gentleman. Pippi pondered for a moment. "Can someone bring me a long rope?" she said. "What good will that do?" said the portly gentleman. "The children are too young to climb down a rope, and besides, how would you get the rope up to them?" "Oh, I learned a thing or two while I was at sea," said Pippi calmly. "What I need now is a rope." No one thought that it would do any good, but Pippi got her rope all the same. A tall tree grew at one end of the skyscraper. The crown of the tree was about the same height as the attic window. But between the tree and the window was a gap of almost 3 yards, and the tree trunk rose straight up without any branches to use for climbing. Not even Pippi would be able to climb that tree. The fire was blazing, the children in the attic were screaming, and all of the people in the square were crying. Pippi got down from her horse and went over to the tree. Then she took the rope and tied it to Mr. Nielsen's tail. "Now you need to be Pippi's good little boy," she told him, and she put him up on the tree trunk and gave him a little shove. He knew perfectly well what he was supposed to do, and he obediently climbed up the tree trunk. For a little monkey, it was no problem at all. The people in the square held their breath as they watched Mr. Nielsen. Soon he reached the crown of the tree. There he sat on the branch and looked down at Pippi. She signaled to him to come back, and he did, but he climbed down on the other side of the tree branch. When Mr. Nielsen was back on the ground, the rope was looped over the branch that now hung down double with both ends touching the ground. "You know what, Mr. Nielsen? You're so clever that you could be a professor any time you want," said Pippi as she untied the knot that held one end of the rope fastened to Mr. Nielsen's tail. Close by stood a house that was being repaired. Pippi ran over and found a long plank. Then she put the plank under her arm, raced over to the tree, grabbed hold of the rope with her free hand, and then braced her feet against the tree trunk. With nimble speed, she climbed up the trunk, and the people stopped crying out of sheer astonishment. When she reached the tree's crown, she placed the plank across a thick branch and cautiously slid it over to the attic window. The plank stretched like a bridge between the tree and the window. No one down in the square uttered a sound. They were speechless with suspense. Pippi climbed out onto the plank. She gave the 2 boys in the attic a friendly smile. "You look so sad," she said. "Do you have a stomach ache?" She ran across the plank and jumped in through the window. "It's awfully hot in here," she said. "You're not going to have to heat the place any more today. I guarantee it. And I think 4 sticks of wood in the stove tomorrow should be plenty." Then she picked up a boy in each arm and climbed back out onto the plank. "Now you're finally going to have some fun," she said. "This is almost like walking a tightrope." And when she reached the middle of the plank, she lifted one leg in the air exactly as she had done in the circus. Then a gasp went through the crowd down in the square. A second later, when Pippi dropped one of her shoes, several elderly women fainted. But Pippi safely reached the tree with the boys, and then all of the people down in the square gave a cheer that thundered through the dark evening and drowned out the roar of the fire. Pippi hauled up the rope and fastened one end tightly to a branch. After that, she tied the other end around one of the boys and slowly and cautiously lowered him down to his overjoyed mother, who was waiting in the square below. She instantly threw her arms around her son and hugged him with tears in her eyes. But Pippi shouted, "Hey, untie the rope. There's another boy up here and he can't fly either." So everyone helped untie the knot to set the first boy free. Pippi was certainly good at tying proper knots. That was something she had learned at sea. Then she hauled the rope back up again, and it was the other boy's turn to be lowered down. Now Pippi was alone up in the tree. She jumped onto the plank, and everyone looked up at her, wondering what she planned to do next. Pippi danced back and forth on the narrow board. She raised and lowered her arms beautifully and began to sing in a hoarse voice. The people standing below in the square could barely hear the words. "A fire is burning, it's burning so hot, it's burning in circles so bright. It's burning for you, it's burning for me, it's burning for those who dance in the night." And as she sang, her dancing got wilder and wilder, and many of the people in the square shut their eyes in fright because they thought she was going to fall and be killed. Huge flames were shooting out of the attic window, and in the glow of the fire, the crowd could see Pippi quite clearly. She raised her arms toward the evening sky as a shower of sparks fell over her, and she shouted loudly, "What a fun fire this is! How fun, how fun!" And then she leaped for the rope. "Here I come," she shouted, and then she lowered herself to the ground with the speed of greased lightning. "3 cheers for Pippi Longstocking! Long may she live!" shouted the fire chief. "Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah!" cried all the people. But one person gave 4 cheers instead of 3, and that was Pippi. So Pippi did come to the rescue. So I'm going to show you all of the pictures. So here is the first picture, and it's showing all of the things that Pippi had in her treasure box that got her thinking about her daddy and all of their travels. And she was a little bit bored. She didn't have much to do, but she certainly found something to do when she went to town, didn't she? And then here's a picture of Mr. Nielsen. And see the fire coming out? Mr. Nielsen went up and he got the rope over the tree so that Pippi could use the rope to climb up the tree. That was very smart, wasn't it? And then here's a picture of Pippi coming back over the board from the burning house over to the tree. And she was kind of doing a type walk, wasn't she? She was being a little bit showy, but she got there. And that is the end of chapter 10. And we will start chapter 11 soon. And this is Grandma Carla, and I love you.